Alexi Pappas and Jeremy Teicher. Well, thank you for sharing your film with us tonight, Jeremy and Alexi. Let's talk a little bit about how this project came to be. How did the two of you meet? How did the film come about? What was the impetus for all this?
Well, so Jeremy and I met when we were in school in New Hampshire at Dartmouth, and Jeremy was already waist deep in filmmaking, and I was more in the creative writing world, and he introduced me to that world while he was working on his first film. And
as I was finishing the first movie, Alexi's running started to get more and more serious, and we also started dating at that time. We're getting married in the spring.
Oh, congratulations.
So I was living in New York, and Alexi had gone to Oregon to run for the Ducks for a 5th year, and it was kind of this decision point of like, should she train for the Olympics? Then long story short, like, well, I'll move out to Oregon, and then let's just make our next film in the running world, so we can kind of do both things at once.
Very cool. Well, Alexi, obviously this is a subject matter that you know well. Can you talk a little bit about what is in the film that is real? As far as I know, some of the cast is actually from the world of running. Talk a little bit about how the film resembles your journey and what has been a part of your authentic experience.
Yeah, so the runners in the film are all training elite athletes, and that was so important to us because we wanted to tell a story from this very real place that was familiar to me, and part of that was making sure that the runners knew how to run. And then as far as like the set and all of the mechanisms that you see, those are all real too. So these aren't sets. They're like the actual underwater treadmills and reverse gravity treadmills that athletes are training on, and we had to sort of navigate the schedules of these real training athletes to film the movie, scheduling everything from around the marching band at Oregon to other real life things going on to get these truly authentic locations and people involved.
Let's talk a little bit about the story itself. It's a really interesting dynamic that we have here with this woman and her father and her mother, and we sort of have this interesting metaphor going on with her running and the family dynamic that's happening. Can you talk a little bit about that family dynamic that we see on screen?
Yeah, I think the story started from and the family dynamic grew from, like, first we started with the setting. Like, okay, we're making a movie about training for the Olympics in Eugene with all these cool facilities. And then the character of Plum, like Alexi's character, grew from that. And, the story blends fiction with reality, not necessarily from Alexi's own experiences, but also from experiences of teammates or people that we've met, or observations that I've made kind of like as an outsider, because I'm not an elite runner. So the story grew that way. And then also, like, the plot it's fiction, so just elements from our own lives or themes that we're interested in. So we were both really interested in looking at, like, this moment of questioning the pursuit of your dream, and that was kind of my emotional connection to the main character. As an indie filmmaker, like, you ask yourself sometimes, like, is this really what's making me happy, or should I just work at a bakery and not think about this anymore? So, like, we kind of wove that in, and then the family dynamics just kind of came from there, like, of what buttons we could push for Plum.
Alexi, most people know you as a world-class athlete. When did this interest in acting arise? Did you ever think as a little girl, one day I'm going to be on the silver screen, or is this a new passion of yours?
When I was little, I actually really wanted to be like my dream was to be like a babysitter and a singer or actress or something. And so I think the theatrical side came out first, and the athletic, I was always playing sports growing up, but have always had this interest in performance in college. It was a lot of like improv theater, but certainly that creative itch like has always been there, and the athletic stuff is really important now because there's this like unique window of time to be pursuing it at this level, but I think the creative stuff sort of like preceded it and will continue on as well.
You studied at UCB and Second City too. It wasn't just improv in college. I want to brag for you. Like there was some actual work that went into it.
Yeah, Jeremy, let's talk a little bit about the supporting cast around Alexi as well. We've seen Rachel Dratch on Saturday Night Live, Andy Buckley from The Office, and other television appearances. How were you able to bring them on board to this project? How did that all come about?
Mm-hmm. With Rachel and Andy, who were kind of our two, it was a reach to get them. Specifically, the way that we reached out to them was one of our executive producers knew Andy and suggested him right away for the role of Bert. And Rachel went to Dartmouth, and through we had this a connection of a connection who had offered one day that if we wanted, they would pass Rachel a script that we wrote. So we had the script was written, and at that point we knew Alexi would be playing the lead. We had arranged to shoot in Eugene. It was this cool project that we had put together. We were in the Sundance Creative Producing Lab, so at that point there was some momentum and legitimacy behind it. So it's like, hey, come out and be in this film that's a mix of non-actors and professional actors, and I think they thought it would be something cool to do.
Alexi, one of the things that strikes me about your character in this film is there are such profound moments of loneliness, I feel like, in the life of an athlete. Even though she, has teammates that she's very dedicated to and a coach, that she is very passionate about. Were there moments from your own journey as an athlete you were able to draw on for inspiration sort of for this lonely journey that your character experiences?
I think so. I think the idea of lonely has this sort of melancholic feel that you sometimes sense in Plumb, and what was important to me was figuring out how to look at that seemingly lonely pursuit as actually one that involves other people, and finding a team, finding a coach, finding all those support network around you that makes it feel like you're not just out there alone, even though you're out there alone. And for Plumb, I think she is almost determinedly alone until she goes through this sort of experience of needing to involve other people in her life. For the first time, she's interacting with her mom and this boy, and butting heads with her former teammate, who's just up until that point has always just been there with no question. And so certainly I think that's something that we at least wanted to point out as a thing that exists in this world.
Jeremy, you mentioned that you don't have the same background in athletics that Alexi does, but you direct this film with a very organic lens, to this world. How did you go about approaching this world that you did not have a background in, but were able to sort of find a entry point into in some way?
Yeah, having Alexi as a co-director was really important with that, but my approach was similar to my previous movie, which we sort of talked about, which seems really different, but my previous film is called Tall as the Baobab Tree, and I filmed it in West Africa, where I traveled a lot and the cast was all like non-actors from this one village. And it was pretty much the same approach, honestly, as this, where you're working, even though this had more professional actors, like the fundamental approach was, I'm going into this real life community in this specific place that's usually kind of off limits. Like the only reason we could film on that track was because Alexi used to be on the Oregon team. So like you're in this kind of guarded community and they're trusting you. So really the guiding principle is like, I know there's gonna one day be a room full of the actual people who are responsible for the places that we're seeing on screen watching this movie. And I need to make sure they feel like this was truthful. And so just kind of bouncing every decision off of that. And it's same to almost an even greater extent with Talus the Baobab Tree, because there's a cultural difference too. So just being really sensitive to that. But then also being an outsider. So, you know, someone who runs on the underwater treadmill every day might not think, oh, that little knob is so cool. But so it's kind of combining both of those was how we did it.
Alexi, what was that process like for you co-directing a film with Jeremy? Were there times that you found yourself able to really enjoy that collaboration? Maybe other times that you saw this scenes very differently? How did the collaboration work in co-directing?
It was so important that Jeremy and I showed up to set every day, like on the same page, and having had, you know, a lot of planning ahead of time, so that when I was acting, Jeremy was really like that captain, director, and like, you know, executing things that we'd discussed, but making sure that there was mostly, you know, there was a leader that everyone was looking to, and I think co-directing is like a very delicate thing, and it was a pleasure to sort of watch and work with Jeremy. And I think one of the moments that was really special was after we filmed one of the race scenes, we talked, and Jeremy said, and it was true, that when he talked to the athletes like actors, it made them really nervous because they were athletes. And when he finally just started talking to them like athletes, like ready, set, go, instead of action, that was when they were able to like click into gear and feel like themselves. And so just to watch you, Jeremy, like adapt and become like the director that needed to show up on this particular set was really cool.
I'd say like divide and conquer is kind of how we like, and writing together too. When we try and sit and work in front of the same document at the same time, like a sentence will take 30 minutes because you're like, where do we put the comma? But so we like will tend to split things up, and then so that was kind of how we did the co-directing thing.
Alexi, I think there's one question on everyone's mind here right now. Did you really eat those ants?
Yes. And the first one was the first ant that I've ever eaten, and they were pretty big, and I winced too much, so Jeremy made me eat another ant. So
there was two.
Sorry. Two.
It's Hollywood, so I have to ask, was there an ant wrangler? How did these ants, did you just find them, or how did this happen?
We bought the ants for the ant farm, so those ants were there. But the ant for the starting line, we did have to, like, because the ants from the ant farm were too small. They wouldn't really read, so we need bigger ants. And in Oregon, there's ants everywhere, but when you really need one, it's kind of hard. So we like called some reptile feed stores, and none of them had ants. So but luckily a PA went and just forgot these ants. The day before, yeah.
Alexi, were you part of the writing the day that the eating of the ants was brought up? At what point did you know you were going to have to eat those ants?
Your idea.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I wrote that into my own destiny there. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. We also have an interesting, metaphor that's going on with the ants, in that there is this situation, shall we say, with Plum and her parents, and sort of trying to find a community and trying to find connection. And then we sort of have these ants in the ant farm, that are colonizing, and the relationships, that are happening there. Anytime we have metaphors like this, in a film, it speaks to the themes that the filmmakers are wanting to communicate. Someone that you just meet on the street who asks you, what is this film really about to you? What are the themes? What is this film at its core about, in both of your opinions?
I think touching on the ants, there's like an element of wanting to do something that makes you stand out, but also having that constant longing to really like fit in, like all the little guys in the ant farm are together, having one purpose. Like sometimes it's easy as maybe a runner or filmmaker or really anyone to look around and be like, wow, those ants have their one purpose that they're doing together. And I guess that's at its best, that's what making a film really is. And pursuing an athletic thing is having like one goal together. But for Plum, I think she wrestles with that because she does feel that loneliness. And she needs to figure out how to have confidence with her own journey. So I think that's what
Jeremy, how about you?
Well, for me, maybe one is sort of a step back from inside the film to just the movie itself, like making a movie that captures this place and this experience in a realistic way. That there's this movie now where that's actually a pretty realistic slice of what it's like to train and try to make it to the Olympics. And we know this because not only did Alexi live it, but a lot of the people in the movie, and we just so many, like some of our earlier screenings were a lot more athlete heavy just because they came to the festival premiere and stuff like that. And that was just the feedback we got of like, oh my gosh, I've never seen a character like Plum on screen before. And we got a lot of questions about her character, especially like in the script phase from advisors who maybe were not in the sports world at all. And we had to say, like, trust me, this type of person definitely exists. And so that was a big goal for me, is like capturing that. Yeah. And then like, within the film, I think I mentioned it earlier, looking at whether pursuing a big goal makes you happy or not.
And we had one teammate in particular, Bridget, who acts in the film, said that this was something that she would show her kids one day, just to show them what her experience was like. And that was like, okay, we did something that is true to her experience as an Olympian, which is great.
Alexi, how is Plum most different from you? How is this character most different from who you really are?
Yeah, so Plum grew up in this like town, single track focused, very like sheltered in that way, and I can appreciate what that might have been like, but I definitely came into the running world from a different background of many sports and many activities. And so I think that's where we have the greatest difference is that I think I came to running later in life and after having had some of those experiences, and Plum is sort of right in there now, just starting to break out and see what else is out there.
Would love to hear from you both on once the film was done, you have it in the can and it's completed, and you're about to go into the editing process with this film. What changed the most from when you scripted this film out to when you finally had it captured? They sometimes say there's the film that you write, there's the film that you shoot, and there's the film that you edit. And what changed for you over that process?
There's a lot. We ended up shooting more actually too, several months later, because some changes, we were like, oh, we wish we had certain number, like this scene, we wish we had it. And then that grew enough to the point where like, okay, let's do an extra weekend. So it's hard to say when the film was really done or in the can. But I think a lot of, so we did have several non-actors in the movie, like real life runners, and some of those performances on the day were just very different. Like how we originally intended, it was not going to be that. So as a result, some of the some characters kind of changed. I think ultimately for the best, because like another difference between this movie and the previous one, which was all non-actors, is that like that was what I learned, is there's a way that you can design a production from the ground up to feature non-actors, and that's like the way to do it. And TRACKTOWN was definitely like, designed in a different way. So as we learned that, we adjusted. I think for the best too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the other little things is that we didn't think people would want to see all the details of the running world as much as they did. Like in some of the earlier cuts, maybe some of the race sequences weren't as long, or some of the little details of the world, the
workout montage.
Yeah, the workout montage, like some of those things that we think are not as interesting because we're living this every day are new and different to most audiences. And so that was sort of the feedback we got through these advisors that we worked with, kind of permission to give a deeper peek into those details and not feel like it can't have those athletic elements.
What you've screened the film in a number of different venues for a number of different types of audiences now. What feedback you mentioned, people wanting to know more about the details of the running world. Any other feedback that surprised you about the film, or that you didn't see coming about the film?
One is like, I think we'd hoped that runners would really embrace the movie as their movie, and the extent to which we've seen that happen from non-elite runners is really cool. Like, high school runners who are really even more into running than Alexi was when she was in high school, and I was not like at all. But it's been cool to really plug in with that, and just see on social media people talking about, like, kids really like taking ownership of the movie is pretty cool. But then also Oregonians, like people from Eugene, and are just proud of having a movie that actively takes place in a town. That's been a fun reaction.
Yeah. I think also that it speaks to some of my male teammates. I think it was a really we wanted to tell this from a female perspective, but that some very accomplished male runners feel like Plumb is someone familiar to them too was like a very cool thing,
It's interesting you bring up Oregon and in the town of Eugene. It feels like you really captured some little subcultures within Eugene, especially, did you know people that live in campers like this and that bring bagels for, all their friends? Where does that inspiration come from? Are those real people we're looking at in those scenes?
Yeah. I mean, the RV belonged to one of the four producers in the movie. We were two, and then there was another producer, and then our fourth, Jay, he grew up in Oregon and is just totally plugged in, and that was like his parents' RV. That house, the sort of Sawyer's roommate's house is just real. That's just as is, so a lot of stuff is there, and we did want to capture Eugene as a town. Well, like, that was something that we thought was really cool about it. Was it's this intense running town, but then right next to it is like the opposite. It's this hippie town, and that's like what Plumb is wrestling with.
Alexi, what were you most afraid of going into this project? What was there anything that you were really nervous about, or that you had anxiety, going into with?
I think just like almost logistically, like can we pull this thing off that is so, thematically it's in my life, it's crossing over the film and the athletic world, but also we're very delicately filming on a track where the Olympic trials takes place, and just being respectful of the places that we were in because they were so real. And I'm very, we were very grateful to have all of that support and energy, and we just wanted to make sort of the town and the people who supported us proud. And I think we did, but it was certainly a nerve-wracking process to navigate that and make sure that we were leaders and like determined to get something done, but also balancing the new nature of filming in these places that have never been filmed in before.
Have you guys screened the film in Eugene yet?
Yes.
How did it go?
It went really well. Like we, a packed house of athletes during the Olympic trials this year were thrilled to have a break from all the pressure of the trials, and also to see the film where the film was made.
It was also cool because in that screening, like, there's a couple little references in there that really you kind of have to live in Eugene to fully understand. So it was cool to get laughs. Like at that point, we had already had the festival premiere, so I'd been to a few screenings and I knew where the laughs should come. So it was cool to hear laughs at other moments, or also like people recognizing themselves in cameos. It was fun. And it was cool too to be in a, like, there's a lot of Olympians and medalists and like really well-known runners in the movie, but most people you would never know. Like some of the bakery, there's like two guys in the background of the bakery who are like legendary. Now they're in their 50s, but they, big time athletes. And most of, like, why would you know unless you're in this specific community? So it was cool to have a screening where not every single reference was understood and appreciated. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm someone who only runs when chased, but I can definitely say I related to this character, and I felt very close to the journey that she goes on. Was very moved by the film. Let's wrap up by talking about what's next. Are you still going to work together as husband and wife? Do you have new projects that you're looking towards? What's in the future?
Yeah, we have projects together. We have sort of individual projects. I think we're always working on each other's stuff, no matter what. But certainly a feature film and more. I don't know if Jeremy wants to.
We have a new movie that we've written that's kind of just fiction now. We're not like pulling from anything in our lives, but we're also, I think, opening this window into the sports world has been really fun, and we're exploring what that might look like in a series space. And that seems to be kind of where a lot of momentum takes. I've noticed a lot of my peers that I've met on the festival circuit over the years, like, are floating in that direction. So we're exploring that world too.
Would you join me in thanking Jeremy and Alexi for coming tonight?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. Have a great evening.